Tell me about a time you solved a problem without much guidance. Introduction. This is a common behavioral interview question for software developers. Interviewers ask this question to understand how independent you are, how you handle unclear requirements, how you research solutions, how you make decisions without waiting for instructions, how you ask smart questions when needed, how you take ownership, how you balance independence with communication. This question is especially important for junior software developers, Java developers, backend developers, full-stack developers, senior software developers, business systems analysts. The best way to answer this question is by using the STAR method. STAR means S. Situation. Explain the background. T. Task. Explain your responsibility. A. Action. Explain what you personally did. R. Result. Explain the final outcome. A good interview answer usually spends 10% situation, 10% task, 60% action, 20% result. The most important part is the action section, because interviewers want to know how you handled uncertainty and solved the problem independently. Question. Tell me about a time you solved a problem without much guidance. Example 1. Learning and building a new API independently. In one of my projects, our team needed to add a new REST API for a feature that was required in the upcoming sprint demo. At that time, the requirement was clear at a high level, but there was not much technical guidance available because senior developers were busy with production support. Task. I was responsible for understanding the requirement, designing the API flow, implementing the endpoint, and making sure it worked correctly before the demo. Action. I started by reviewing the existing API patterns in the project. I checked how controllers, service classes, repositories, request DTOs, response DTOs, validation, and exception handling were implemented in similar modules. Then I created a small implementation plan before writing code. I identified request fields, response structure, validation rules, database changes, service layer logic, error handling scenarios, test cases. Since I did not have much guidance, I used existing code standards as my reference. Whenever I was unsure about a business rule, I asked focused questions to the product owner, instead of waiting for someone to explain everything. After implementation, I tested the API using different request scenarios and added unit tests for the main service logic. I also requested a code review from a senior developer before merging the change. Result. The API was completed before the sprint demo. It passed testing with minimal changes. The senior developer appreciated that I followed the existing project structure and asked only focused questions when needed. The experience improved my confidence in independently handling similar API tasks. Why this answer works. This answer is strong because it shows independence, learning from existing code, structured thinking, focused communication, ownership, testing mindset. Example 2. Debugging an issue without clear documentation. In one project, a batch job started failing in the test environment. The issue was difficult because there was very little documentation about the batch flow, and the developer who originally worked on it had moved to another team. Task. I was responsible for understanding the batch process, identifying the failure point, and fixing the issue so testing could continue. Action. I started by reading the batch job configuration and tracing the execution flows step by step. I reviewed job configuration, reader logic, processor logic, writer logic, database queries, input file format, error logs. Then I compared a successful previous run with the failed run. I found that the input file had a new field format that the existing processor logic did not handle. Since documentation was limited, I created my own flow diagram to understand how data moved through the job. After identifying the root cause, I updated the processor logic to handle both the old and new input formats. I also added better logging, so future failures would be easier to debug. Finally, I documented the batch flow and shared it with the team. Result. The batch job started running successfully again. Testing was able to continue without further delay. The documentation I created helped other developers understand the batch process faster in future work. Why this answer works. This answer is good because it shows check, self-learning, in doubling without documentation, batch processing understanding, ownership, documentation improvement, team contribution. Example 3. Solving a production-like issue independently situation. During testing, QA reported that one API was returning inconsistent results. The issue was not assigned with much detail. The ticket only said that the API response was sometimes missing records. Task. I was responsible for investigating the issue, finding the root cause, and fixing it without much initial guidance. Action. I started by reproducing the issue using the same test data QA provided. Then I compared API responses for successful and failed scenarios. I checked the service layer logic, database query, filters, and sorting rules. After investigation, I found that the query used pagination, but the sorting was not deterministic. When multiple records had the same timestamp, the database returned them in a different order across requests. Because of that, some records appeared to be missing between pages. To fix the issue, I added a secondary sort field using the unique record ID. This made the pagination result stable and predictable. I also added test cases to verify first page results, second page results, records with same timestamp, stable sorting, no missing records between pages. Result. The API started returning consistent results. QA was able to complete testing successfully. The fix also improved our pagination standard, and we reused the same approach in other APIs. Why this answer works. This answer is strong because it shows current independent investigation, current API debugging, current database sorting knowledge, current pagination understanding, current root cause analysis, current reusable improvement. Example 4. Implementing a feature with unclear requirements. Situation. In one project, the business team requested a new search filter, but the requirement was not fully detailed. The ticket only mentioned that users should be able to search records by status and date range. Task. I was responsible for clarifying the requirement, implementing the filter, and making sure the behavior matched business expectations. Action. I started by reviewing existing search screens and checking how similar filters worked. Then I created a list of open questions. Check, should the date range be inclusive? Check, what happens if only start date is provided? Check, what happens if only end date is provided? Check, should inactive records be included? Check, how should invalid dates be handled? Instead of waiting for full instructions, I prepared a simple proposal and reviewed it with the product owner. Once the behavior was confirmed, I implemented the backend filter logic. I also updated validation rules and added test cases for different combinations of status and date range. I worked with QA to confirm expected behavior before closing the story. Result. The feature was delivered on time. There were fewer clarification issues during testing because the edge cases were discussed early. The product owner appreciated that I proactively identified gaps instead of waiting for detailed instructions. Why this answer works. This answer is good because it shows requirement clarification, proactive thinking, business communication, edge case analysis, independent ownership, delivery focus. Example 5. Improving logging without being asked. Situation. In one application, developers were spending too much time debugging failed API requests because the logs did not provide enough useful information. There was no formal task assigned to improve logging, but it was a repeated pain point during development and support. Task. I decided to improve the logging in one critical module so issues could be diagnosed faster. Action. I started by reviewing recent support issues and identifying what information was missing from the logs. I found that many errors did not include enough context, such as request ID, user action, service name, or error category. I updated the logging approach to include co-correlation ID and request ID important business identifiers, error category, clear error message, service and method context. I made sure not to log sensitive personal information. I also created a small logging guideline for the team, so future logs would be consistent. After making the changes, I tested failure scenarios and verified that the logs helped trace the issue more easily. Result: debugging became faster for that module. The team was able to identify issues with less back and forth. The logging guideline was later adopted for other modules as well. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows initiative, production support thinking, secure logging awareness, team improvement, problem solving without waiting for assignment. Example 6. Fixing a front-end issue without full design guidance situation. In one full-stack project, users reported that a page was confusing because after saving data, the screen did not clearly show whether the save was successful. There was no detailed design available for the improvement. Task: I was responsible for improving the user experience while keeping the change simple and consistent with the existing application style. Action: I started by reviewing similar screens in the application to understand the existing UI pattern. I checked how success messages, error messages, loading states, and button states were handled elsewhere. Then I implemented a consistent save flow. The change included disabling the save button during submission, showing a loading state, showing a success message after save, showing clear error messages on failure, refreshing data after successful update, preventing duplicate submissions. I also tested the behavior for successful saves, failed saves, slow network responses, and repeated clicks. Result: the page became easier to use. Users clearly understood whether their changes were saved. The number of support questions related to that page decreased. Why this answer works? This answer is good for full-stack developers because it shows UI/UX thinking, independent decision-making, consistency with existing patterns, front-end debugging, user-focused improvement. Example 7. Solving a deployment issue independently situation. During a release, one service failed to start in the test environment after deployment. The error message was not very clear, and there was limited guidance available at that moment. Task: I was responsible for investigating the deployment failure and getting the service running so testing could continue. Action: I started by checking the deployment logs, application startup logs, environment variables, and configuration files. I compared the working environment with the failing environment. After investigation, I found that one required configuration property was missing in the test environment. The application expected the property during startup, but the error message did not clearly mention the missing value. To fix the issue, I added the missing configuration and restarted the service. Then I improved the startup validation so that if the property was missing in the future, the application would show a clear error message. I also updated the deployment checklist to include that configuration. Result: the service started successfully, and testing continued. The improved validation made future configuration issues easier to identify. The deployment checklist helped reduce similar environment-related problems. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows CAPS, deployment troubleshooting, configuration debugging, environment comparison, prevention mindset, ownership without much guidance. Example 8. Researching and implementing a new library situation. In one project, we needed to generate PDF reports from backend data. The team had not used a PDF generation library in that project before, and there was no existing internal example. Task: I was responsible for researching possible solutions and implementing the first version of the PDF report feature. Action: I started by comparing different PDF generation approaches based on project needs. I considered ease of integration, licensing, formatting support, table generation, image support, performance, maintainability. After selecting a suitable library, I created a small proof of concept to generate a sample PDF. Then, I reviewed the approach with the team to make sure it matched our coding and security standards. After approval, I implemented the actual report generation flow. I separated the logic into clear layers. Click data retrieval. Click report mapping. Click PDF template creation. Click PDF generation. Click error handling. Click API response. I also added unit tests for the data mapping logic and manual validation for generated PDF output. Result: the PDF report feature was delivered successfully. The proof of concept helped the team understand the approach before full implementation. The structure I created became the foundation for future PDF reports in the application. Why this answer works. This answer is good because it shows highlighted researchability, independent learning, proof of concept, technical evaluation, clean design, reusable implementation. Best short answer version. If you need a short interview answer, you can say, in one project, QA reported that an API was returning inconsistent results, but the ticket did not have much detail. It only mentioned that some records were missing from the response. I was responsible for investigating and fixing the issue without much guidance. I started by reproducing the issue with QA's test data. Then I compared successful and failed responses and reviewed the service logic, database query, filters, and pagination. I found that the API used pagination, but the sorting was not deterministic. When multiple records had the same timestamp, the database returned them in different orders across requests, which made some records appear missing between pages. I fixed it by adding a secondary sort using the unique record ID. I also added test cases for records with the same timestamp and verified stable pagination. As a result, the API returned consistent results. QA completed testing successfully, and we reused the same pagination approach in other APIs. Common mistakes to avoid. 1. Saying, I did everything alone. Bad answer. I solved everything by myself without asking anyone. Better answer. I worked independently, but I asked focused questions when business clarification was needed. 2. Not showing your process. Bad answer. I figured it out and fixed it. Better answer. Explain how you researched, investigated, tested, and validated the solution. 3. Ignoring communication. Bad answer. I did not need to talk to anyone. Better answer. I communicated progress and asked targeted questions when needed. 4. Choosing a simple example. Bad answer. I changed a label on a screen without guidance. Better answer. Choose a problem that shows investigation, decision-making, and ownership. 5. No result. Bad answer. The issue was fixed. Better answer. The API became stable, QA completed testing, and the solution became a standard pattern for similar APIs. Best practices for answering this question. Use the STAR method. Choose an example with uncertainty. Explain what guidance was missing. Show how you created structure. Explain how you researched. Mention focused questions. Show independent decision-making. Explain testing and validation. Mention communication. End with a measurable result or learning. What interviewers are looking for. Interviewers want to see whether you can work independently, handle ambiguity, research solutions, learn from existing patterns, ask good questions, make reasonable decisions, communicate progress, avoid being blocked, deliver results with limited direction. For junior roles, they want to see excellent learning ability, excellent curiosity, asking focused questions, following existing patterns. For senior roles, they want to see check ownership, ambiguity management, technical judgment, reusable solutions, leadership mindset. Strong words to use in your answer. You can use words like investigated, researched, clarified, analyzed, compared, proposed, implemented, validated, documented, communicated, owned, delivered. Example: I researched the existing patterns, clarified the missing business rules, proposed an approach, implemented the solution, validated it with test cases, and documented the behavior for the team. Good example topics you can use. Depending on your experience, you can talk about building a new API with limited guidance, debugging an issue without documentation, fixing inconsistent API results, clarifying unclear requirements, improving logs without being asked, handling deployment issues, implementing a new library, creating a proof of concept, solving batch job failures. Front-end behavior, check. Creating documentation for a complex flow. Final summary. Tell me about a time you solved a problem without much guidance is an important interview question for software developers. The best answer should include unclear situation, your responsibility, how you created a plan, how you researched, how you asked focused questions, how you implemented the solution, how you tested it, what result you achieved. Good examples include check. Building an API independently, debugging with limited documentation, fixing inconsistent API results, clarifying unclear requirements, improving logging, fixing deployment issues, researching a new library. The strongest answers show independence, ownership, communication, and good judgment.